Hey folks, so just a little memorial anecdote here. We've just lost the furry artist Brian O Connell. He was one of the original furry artists from back in the 80s when this thing started. And Brian was a fanboy's fanboy. So, back in those days, a furry fandom was incredibly dynamic. It was full of, it was directors from Disney and producers from Warner's, and it was comic book artists after comic book artists, fine artists, musicians, game designers and authors like myself, children's authors. It was actually a pretty amazing scene. Now, in came some talented fan artists, and one of those was Terry Smith. And Terry Smith, she was and still is, a classic pin-up girl artist. That's what she did. She did furry pin-up girls. Still pretty coy. Brian wasn't coy. He bombs into the scene in the very early magazines and so on, and it was like, oh, you're doing straight out porn. Look, most of the fandom at that stage is like, well, look, it came from, Fritz the Cat style alternative comics. So it's like, oh, well, this is someone embracing those kind of, crazy rebellious roots. So, God bless. So, Brian was, face it, he was kind of a big fat wobbly fanboy. And he was as dodgy AF, I have to say. He was always doing a scam, and by fanboys fanboy, the quintessential lives in someone's basement and never showers. He was the model. So one year he was traveling from, I think it was like Texas or something. He decides to come to Conference, which were the early furry cons that were being held in Anaheim, in California. But before coming out, he decides, he's going to get piercings, man. He's going to get piercings. So he got a buttload of these. Pretty much literally. He got ear piercings and nasal piercings and eyebrow piercings. And he got like a Prince Albert. And then he gets on the cheapest possible means to cross the country, just straight up. So he gets onto Greyhound buses and begins this like slow 3 or 4 day bus tour. And this guy he never had any money. He's always broke as hell. So he's not like taking breaks in motels or sleeping. He's just sleeping on the buses and in the bus stations. And over the course of 3 or 4 days, of course, he hasn't bought anything to keep these piercings clean. Those who've had, piercings know that you have to really, really, really hit these things up with disinfectants and so forth until they heal. These things infected like major mundo big time. By the time he staggered into this convention, he's actually running with sweat because the infections have gotten big and they're giving him a fever. And he ended up being dragged off to hospital emergency, put on intravenous antibiotics, and of course, all these piercings are taken out and have to close. And when he came into conventions, he smelled. He Jesus, really smelled. So, kind of my funniest memory of the guy was actually when he wasn't there. I had come over to the States. I'd been at Gen Con, and someone had given me a packet of stuff and said, are you going on to the Furry Con in a couple of weeks' time? Yes, I was. So they handed me a packet. Could you give this to Brian O'Connell when he turns up? It's some of my artwork. I promised I'd give him a bunch. All right, fair enough. I shall courier this onward to Brian. So I turn up at this convention, and there was a wonderful, wonderful art friend of mine, Sean Howell. Flits across with some... He's one of Sean's, he was just another quintessential booby artist, but he was just... I love Sean's stuff. He's another one that's passed on, unfortunately. But Sean had this wonderful wry humour, and Sean was just sitting there at a table, drawing away in the art show. So I came up to him and said, hi, Has anyone seen Brian O'Connell? Sean doesn't look up. He just keeps drawing and just says, "We're speaking here of a creature that has never been encountered on over 300 survived worlds. A creature that gestates inside a living human host and has concentrated acid for blood." Yeah, that's the guy. I said, "Nah, I haven't seen him." He left an impression, all right. He kind of bumbled onwards in later years, still kind of drawing the same stuff. And I think that's always a huge artistic no, because he had a set art style in 1980. It never kind of improved or developed. So, he had the audience that he had, which meant, going to cons and kind of drawing at tables. And but, yeah, there's no way to grab a wider audience is the problem when you do that. So, artists beware. There's a friend in Anaheim who sort of has a house, and it's almost used as a sort of a drop-in centre for people from that community who've been very, very, very down on their luck. Brian had ended up, homeless and on the streets and everything. In their usual way, that household took him in and were looking after him. But yeah, they just found him dead of a heart attack. Basically, there was nothing they could do. Couldn't revive him. His health was bad. He'd remained the quintessential kind of unhealthy, big fat kind of fanboy guy for all those years. So, look, he could be a funny guy. But like I said, his personal presence at conventions, it was always like, "Please tell me he showered this year." "Hi, Brian wants to come along to your room party." "Only if he showers." Yeah, it was sort of like, yeah. But, his artwork was a core of the original furry fandom. His enthusiasm meant that he was always a contributor. Whenever someone had a project, whenever someone had a new magazine or something, there he would be in there as a major contributor. So he was one of those key voices that helped start a fandom back in the days when the fandom was a relatively joyous, innocent, creative band of folk. So his presence will be sorely missed. His artwork hopefully will be sort of treasured and enjoyed by those people who knew him. And if anyone ever really archives properly the genesis and the evolution of furry artwork within that fandom, Brian O'Connell's artwork does definitely deserve a place of honour. So anyway, it's a huge shame to have lost him. And I'm going to run around and find a few people and see what stories they remember. Anyway, cheers everyone.